Seal Bay 3 now, or they'll vent with it. Dr. Ref Varden's boots slammed against the grated flooring as he pushed the gurney down the corridor. The walls vibrated, not from impact, but from the internal atmospheric compensators failing one by one. His hands were slick with coolant residue and someone else's blood. Ahead, the blast doors blinked amber. Behind him, the boy on the stretcher coughed blood through a neck brace, not meant for zero-gravity pressure shifts. The Orion Harrow, a vessel built to stabilize minds, not defend bodies, groaned under its own weight. Its structure had been optimized for ergonomic routing, rooms curving softly around patient comfort, silence piped through padded channels, floor lights calibrated to soothe. And now the ceiling screamed with kinetic stress fractures. Pressure drop, Deck 2A, we're losing containment. From the comms alcove, Mark Tilvin slammed his palm into the manual override. No signal. The heads-up display above his station flickered with static. Communication bands swirled into red spirals. Every interstellar emergency frequency returned nothing but compression distortion. The pirate fleet hadn't just struck, the Threx had cut everything. No relays, no response, no one coming. Ref pulled the boy inside the bay as the doors began to shut. He shouted over his shoulder, "Where is engineering?" Coruscant's head popped from a junction panel like a ghost caught mid-materialization. The junior technician's fingers bled from knuckled scraping as he wired a bypass without gloves. I rerouted power from medshield support to diagnostics. We've got a minute, maybe less, before the rear thruster's temperature regulation cycles into collapse. Ref blinked. English. Core didn't look up. It's going to overheat and burst. A siren began as a sharp chirp, then trailed into static. Ref looked up. That's not a systems alarm. No, said Core slowly. That's the last oxygen sensor failing. Lights flickered. The once sterile corridor, painted in calming ash blue, now glowed a twitching bruised orange. Foam tiles peeled from the edges. Panels that once displayed neurological diagnostics now buzzed with interference. The display's UI melting sideways like heat-distorted glass. Midway through the corridor, beyond the sealed bay, a man crouched by the ship's tertiary flow manifold. He wasn't wearing the medical insignia. No rank markings, no emergency beacon. Varn Ekkor moved without haste, screwing a wrench into the junction, torquing a coolant line into a loop-back chamber. No one had called him. No one had ordered the adjustment. No one even knew his clearance code had been accepted by the terminal 5 minutes earlier. Core saw him first. He's in restricted control access. That's the ops reserve manifold. Ref stood upright. That's emergency failover territory. Only bridge can rewire there. Varn didn't speak. He tightened a final bolt, then reached toward the power cycle tab, fingers hovering, but not yet touching. He turned his head slightly, catching Ref in the corner of his eye. "What are you doing?" Ref asked. Ekkor spoke without raising his voice. "Restarting the core routing. You've got 3 circulation fans operating at 68%. They're going to trigger backflow into medbay ventilation in 12 minutes. That's unfiltered coolant air. How do you—" "Because I designed this routing system." Ref blinked. "You're civilian logistics. You're not even bridge support." "I wasn't then." The ship jolted. Hard. Not an explosive impact. A torsion shift. Like something external had grabbed the vessel's frame and turned it mid-spin. The hallway lights snapped off completely. In the dark, Ref whispered, "That wasn't a boarding clamp." "No," Mark said. "That was them turning us toward their extraction bay." The emergency lights flicked on, low lumen, yellow-white, just enough to show the hallway distorted in the angle of tilt. The Orion Harrow wasn't just in danger, it was now cargo, drifting without command in enemy alignment vector. From above, ceiling conduits burst. Liquid nitrogen hissed from a fractured coolant pipe. The hiss wasn't sharp, it was whispered steam, coating the air in frost that clung to the gurney edges and Ref's sleeves. He pulled the blanket tighter over the boy. Ekkor tapped the manifold switch. A brief, smooth vibration followed, like the ship itself exhaled after holding breath too long. He stood. "No more backflow," he said. "You have 18 minutes of clean air on this deck. Maybe 20. Depends how fast your people start dying." Ref stepped forward, his body between the man and the path back towards systems access. "You want to explain how you know that?" Ekkor looked past him. "Medbay 4 still has functioning cold sleep units." "Yes, 2. Use one, strip the frame of the other. Why? Ekkor's gaze never shifted. Because that one's going to become a pressure funnel. You're going to rig it with nitrogen pulse dampeners and a filtered injection valve. When they breach, it needs to rupture inward, not out. Keeps the blast directional. Ref didn't reply. Look, Ekkor added, you can argue, or you can make sure the kid you just saved doesn't suffocate in a minute. He walked past without permission. Ref didn't stop him. Mark stared at the central display. The power draw grid shifted. Lines of energy rerouted to cold storage compartments and auxiliary filtration units. Kor checked his portable toolkit. How's he doing that without bridge override? He's not using override, Mark said. He's rewriting the command stack. You can't rewrite control systems from subsystem access. He just did. Down near deck vent 6, a bang echoed through the walls. Not explosive, more like a door being crushed in by raw mechanical stress. They're cutting through, Kor muttered. On the medbay floor, the boy stirred. His lips were turning pale. Ref bent over him. You hold on, little one. You hold on. A dry electric snap tore through the wall. Not near. Internal. Mark cursed. They've triggered magnetic locking systems. They're scanning for breach points. And then silence. No alarms. No chatter. No status updates. Just the cold, systematic pause of a predator waiting for failure to complete. Varn Ekkor, now at the central ventilation relay, tapped in 3 lines of code. He paused, then entered a 4th. The screen flashed. Override accepted. Routing reserved. He didn't smile. He just looked at the countdown timer and adjusted the oxygen percentage down by 2%. Only he would know that meant the pipes wouldn't combust, yet. In 12 minutes, they would. And someone, somewhere on that enemy vessel, would realize too late that they should never have boarded a hospital ship designed by a man who didn't believe in neutrality, only outcomes. He's rewriting the ship like it's a patient. Korsen whispered it, but it rang louder than the burst conduit behind him. The neural mapping bed in Medbay 4, once used to diagnose cerebral trauma, now pulsed with redirected input streams. Ekkor had bypassed its diagnostic firmware and replaced it with a custom command interface. The laser plasma display glowed faint red in the dark, reflecting across the contours of his face like a forge warming to ignition. Inside the mapping chamber, coils repurposed from cortical alignment modules hissed and snapped with overcharged feedback. The ship's internal stabilizers had dropped again. Gravity lurched, not into failure, but unpredictability. The stretcher beside Ref Varden drifted, clattering into a row of abandoned trauma carts. The boy on it didn't stir. Ekkor, Ref said, not shouting, but clipped. I want to know exactly what you're doing before I let you reroute surgical hardware into God knows what. Ekkor didn't respond immediately. He was focused on the array, fingers gliding across the touch nodes, every motion deliberate, no wasted movement. Then quietly, can the neural mapping lasers be retuned to deliver microbursts instead of scans? Ref narrowed his eyes. You want to weaponize beam diagnostics? Ekkor turned to face him fully, arms still at his side. Only if you want the next squad of boarders to walk through a false sterilization field and find their armor reacting like soft metal. You'll burn the medbay's energy cells doing that. They're already marked non-operational. Use what the ship has or wait for atmosphere failure to make the decision for us. He didn't say it cruelly. There was no panic, no arrogance, just logic folded into action. From above, another tremor stuttered the ceiling tiles. Something heavy rolled in the air ducts. Somewhere in the dark, a surgical clamp fell from a suspended rail and clinked onto the floor. The noise didn't echo. Nothing echoed anymore. The oxygen density had dropped too far for reverberation. Mark appeared at the doorway, his face pale under the flickering emergency nodes. I ran a scan off the comms interceptor before the console failed. I got signal distortions coming from the portside hull, 12 active biosignatures moving along deck junctions. Clamps, Ref asked. Already burned through. They're inside. Ref's chest tightened. Kor leaned over a side console, eyes scanning the HUD readouts. We lost filtration control in corridor E7. If they're smart, they'll use it to force decompression. They're not smart, Ekkor said. They're expecting surrender. Ref stepped between him and the neural chamber. And if they don't get it? Ekkor's hand hovered over the ignition node. They get redesign. He tapped once. The mapping bed's secondary arms extended, not with scanning coils, but with modified coolant tubes fused with ignition triggers from the cryo bay. He adjusted the range output to 90 centimeters, the chamber recalibrated with a sharp hiss. The smell of burning insulation replaced the chilled sterility that once defined the room. Kor stepped back, his voice dry. I used to scan patients in that bed. Ekor nodded without turning. So did I. In corridor D4, the temperature dropped further. Ref passed by the stabilization wing, what was left of it, and saw 3 patients still breathing through jury-rigged masks. He stopped. Any of them ambulatory? He asked a medic crouched by the wall. No, came the reply, choked. 1's blind. 2 can't move their legs. Keep them here. Don't transfer. Let gravity stay their ally. Ref didn't explain why. He didn't need to. Mark's voice came over the intercom, brittle from signal decay. The Threx are splitting. 3 units are approaching the central spine. 2 are climbing through the maintenance shaft, near cold storage. Another group is cycling through the abandoned surgery block. Ekor stood at the main relay between the thermal junction and the air recirculator. We'll handle the central units with heat shift traps. Ref stared. You have heat shift traps. I do now. Kor blinked. You can't possibly. You think too literally. Ekor interrupted. I'm not building mines. I'm reassigning intentions. Ref tilted his head. That's not engineering. That's strategy. Ekor finished. The medbay lights dipped once. Mark's signal crackled again. They're breaching spine corridor. 5 minutes. Ekor adjusted the thermal modulator valves. Recalibrated. Set trigger threshold to 70 kilograms per panel. When they step into the corridor, the floor grid will cycle and dump scalded coolant through the vent vanes. That could ignite the bioresidue, Ref warned. Then let it burn. The corridor went silent again. Outside the ship creaked, not from impact this time, but adjustment. The Orion Harrow was realigning. In the central bay, Ekor dismantled a cortical sync unit, stripping it for its magnetic alignment filaments. Kor watched, wordless. The silence between them was not discomfort, it was comprehension without burden. Each tool that passed through Ekor's fingers ceased to be medical. Every tube, bolt and circuit board became a decision point. From a crate, Ekor pulled a respiration canister, twisted open its valve, and measured its output by the drift of frost across the vent housing. Mark's signal buzzed one last time. 12 life signs, all converging on deck 4. They've stopped moving. Ref turned to him. Why? Ekor didn't answer. He was busy realigning the coolant dispersal system to overfeed the pressure chamber. When Ref repeated the question, Ekor finally looked at him. They're listening, he said. They want to hear us panic. Ref blinked, then looked to the boy still lying under the respirator. He whispered, more to himself than anyone, then let them hear the silence instead. And as the lights faded again, the only thing that moved was the timer Ekor had embedded in the chamber panel, counting down the moments not to death, but to design. They're inside. Mark's voice came through the bulkhead speaker like a whisper trapped in static, not broken, suppressed. Refit Varden felt the weight of the announcement settle into his chest, but the air was too thin to carry dread properly anymore. He stood near the central spine junction, hands damp from adjusting a failing oxygen rig just minutes earlier. Far below, the pressure differential shifted again. Not a boom. A buckle. The kind of sound steel makes when it's adjusting under weight. It was never meant to carry. Kor Sen hunched beside a relay conduit with a neurosync cable between his teeth, tapped a line into the power reroute panel. 3 biosigns breaching deck 4, moving slow, methodical, like they know what kind of ship this is. They think it's quiet, Ekor said. His voice carried no threat, no satisfaction, just acceptance. He watched a laser plasma display overhead blink through biometric waveforms. Each dot pulsed not with heartbeats, but with missteps. No camera feed? Ref asked. Ekor didn't answer. He was already walking. The corridor near cargo intake had been transformed, not rebuilt, reinterpreted. What used to be a supply transfer channel now housed 6 medpods lined head to toe. They hadn't been powered on in hours. To the Thrix they'd look like leftover cryo units, unmoving, harmless, forgotten. One of the pods blinked softly. Not a system malfunction, a pediatric bot, dome-headed limbs reinforced with child-safe padding, cartoon sun peeling from its chassis, rolled into the center of the hallway. Its wheels squeaked once before realigning. It paused, scanned. The Threx saw it and hesitated. Inside the lead raider's helmet, the rebreather snapped in response to chemical identifiers. No threat detected. The bot lifted its head. "Welcome," it said, voice modulated to a soft trill. "You're safe here." Then it stopped speaking, and the floor began to glow. Ref grabbed the side of a bracing unit as the corridor above them shook. This time it wasn't torsion. It was compression. Air pulled inward before releasing outward with a concussive crack that nearly lifted him off his feet. "Was that a bomb?" Core shouted. "No," Ecker replied, watching the waveform spike flatten. "That was thermal ignition from oxygen backflow. I calibrated it to mimic decompression. They'll assume we tried to self-vent." "You mean they won't retreat?" "They'll press in, believing we failed." On the deck near the blast site, the walls dripped with condensed coolant mist. Armor plating twisted into shapes it had never been forged to hold. The lead Threx trooper's helmet had partially melted, fused with his own shoulder pad from the redirected plasma spill. Another raider crawled, blind, hand reaching for a stabilizer beacon that no longer pulsed. The remaining one stood back to back with nothing but static in his comms. Then he heard it. Not a voice. A soft, rhythmic beeping. His head turned toward a medpod. Its hatch hissed open. Mark stared at the relay output. Second detonation triggered. Heat spike isolated to medical ward subhull. No breach in oxygen levels. Ref looked sideways at Ecker. "That pod, what did you put in it?" "Nothing lethal," Ecker replied. "Just a stack of pressure-stabilized injectors filled with saline. Burst under compressed flame. It blinds anything with photoreactive optics." Core gave a nervous half-laugh. "That's not nothing." "It's not a weapon," Ecker corrected. "It's a message." Ref ran down the secondary access tunnel to reach the adjacent corridor. The air was thick, not from smoke, but condensation from burst cooling lines and residual heat radiation. The walls pulsed under emergency backup power, red alternating with violet, casting the hall into something resembling a heartbeat. He passed the charred remains of 2 medcarts. Scorch marks didn't trail, they radiated, patterns that looked more like surgical cauterizations than explosions. Every trap was symmetrical, focused, clean. He turned the corner and froze. A Threx body hung from the ceiling vent, spiked there by a misaligned intravenous housing line, still dripping with bloodless fluid. The creature had been lifted by decompression, then skewered on re-entry. At the end of the hall, one medpod was still open. Inside, nothing but a taped message. "Exit closed." Core's hands shook as he tried to reroute power to the inertial locks. "Stop forcing the override," Ecker said from behind him. "It's the only way I can slow their reinforcements. You're pulling from Medbay 3's vitals relay. You cut that, and you cut every live stat across the surgery ward." Core stepped back. "I didn't realize, you're reacting," Ecker said. "This ship doesn't need panic. It needs choreography." Ref stepped in, his tone harder than before. "You think this is performance art?" Ecker turned toward him, unblinking. "It's survival, styled by intent." Ref looked toward the laser display still cycling through biometric pulse variances. "You built this like a test case," Ecker corrected him. "Like a thesis." The air was getting thinner. The walls didn't groan, they shrunk, flexing inward with every passing second. The environmental regulator in corridor F1 collapsed. The emergency alert chirped once, then shut down. That meant it had no more alerts to give. Mark's voice came again. "No motion from the Threx team. Still reading signals, but they've stopped moving." Ref exhaled. "Dead? Or trying not to be?" Core walked past the now cooled neural bed, staring into its cracked frame. "This isn't defense." Ecker adjusted a coil on the intake vent, aligning it back to regulation. "No," he said softly. "This ship isn't defenseless." He snapped the casing shut. "It's unfinished." "The corridor's breathing," Core muttered. The walls of Section B6 pulsed faintly, condensation streaking along the edges like sweat on chilled metal. Lights flickered at irregular intervals, casting long strobing shadows that bent around the curve of the spine tunnel. The temperature dipped, then surged, then fell again. Unnatural, engineered. Ecker stood at the threshold, crouched beside a grating he had half peeled from the floor. His hands moved in silence, threading lengths of wire scavenged from a broken cryo-bed into a circular conduit. Around him, shattered syringe casings lay in scattered arcs, their plungers removed and replaced with Titan coil springs sourced from spinal tension braces. Each mechanism timed, each set to discharge exactly once. He didn't speak. He hadn't since the last strike team failed to finish crossing Deck 5. Behind him, Ref watched the rhythm of movement. Everything the man touched changed function, never randomly, never with hesitation. The hallway shuddered, internal, not external. A controlled shift. "Did you?" Kor began. "No," Ekar replied. Still crouched. Ref turned to the nearest panel, tapping into the heads-up diagnostics. Heat exchange surge. "It's climbing again." "That's on purpose," Ekar said. "The floor plates are linked to redundant exhaust valves. When triggered, they'll vent from beneath, push plasma across surface level in 2 directions. Not a burn, a barrier." Kor stepped back. "You mean it won't kill them? It will disorient them. Then the second tier activates." "What second tier?" Ekar stood. He didn't answer. Through the observation panel above corridor B6, 3 Thrix moved in unison. Tall, skeletal, plated in asymmetrical armor. Their movements slow but deliberate, weapons drawn, not raised, but ready. They stepped onto the floor grid. The first hiss was soft, like heated breath against ice. Then the panels cracked, not apart, but downward. They didn't fall, they dropped into controlled free fall, only a meter, but enough to jolt balance. Below, a dense mesh of magnetic filaments, each charged to attract any armor with trace current, pulled instantly. Their limbs locked, plates clanged together. Mobility gone. From either wall, slender tubes opened. Surgical fragments, scalpels honed to micro-edges, infused with pulse induction, ejected into the suspended zone. The trap didn't detonate, it dissected. Sir Drow leaned forward in his observation chair aboard the drifting Council scout vessel. His eyelids flicked as he watched the intercepted transmission from the Threx tactical drone. The feed, unfiltered, unauthorized, played in silence across the laser plasma projection dome. No energy weapons, no burst projectiles, just engineered failure and kinetic decisions. He turned to the junior observer beside him. "Where was that weapon protocol filed?" The Age shook his head. "It wasn't. That wasn't a weapon system. That was converted infrastructure." "From what?" "Neural diagnostics." Drow whispered. "This wasn't luck, this is rehearsal." Back aboard the Orion Harrow, Ref and Mark stood in the auxiliary medbay, now covered in stripped brackets, disconnected panel nodes, and every type of surgical tubing imaginable, reassembled into coiled tracks and timed vent triggers. Ref crossed his arms. "I'm starting to think I'm not in command here. You're the lead medical officer," Mark said, adjusting a display panel. "But he's not healing anyone. He's also not killing randomly," Ref added. "He's repurposing." Kor stood by the wall, watching Ekar through a split in the doors. He asked, "How do you even know how to wire that?" Ekar's hands paused briefly. Then he resumed. He said nothing. Farther down, the Thrix attempted to flank from the lateral access point, Corridor 3, previously a patient intake hall. The moment the second squad moved across the floor, a timed relay inside the oxygen modulator triggered. Instead of breathable air, the ducts pushed out flash-suppressed mist layered with aerosolized skin irritants, harvested from expired disinfectant packs. Their visors fogged instantly. Clarity gone. And then came the shrapnel. Not from grenades. There were none. Instead, the old syringe loaders repurposed, timed for 3-second delay, launched sterilized bone fragments from a long-discarded anatomical training dummy. Each shard had been reshaped into blades. The Thrix didn't cry out. Their species rarely did. But their movements changed. They hesitated. And hesitation, Ekar had built for. In the Harrow's central junction, Ref found Kor staring at a diagnostic loop cycling through Ekar's custom Rewrote logs. The syntax didn't match any medical protocol. Kor pointed. That's field code, non-linear system logic. You can't route a pressure burst through signal layering unless you've done tactical restructuring before. Military restructuring. Ref rubbed his jaw. "You're saying he's lying about who he is?" "No, I'm saying he never told us." Outside, the drifting Threx vessel continued recording, its optics static-ridden from internal crossfire. Its drone, now orbiting the Harrow at a cautious distance, fed the images back through 6 secure galactic networks. The Council watched. Analysts cross-referenced signatures. One of them stopped. That pulse modulation, they're using the life support system's own output coils as signal jammers. Jammers? Yes, to interfere with Threk's proximity scans. The ship is hiding its own interior. Every time a breach happens, it doesn't send out distress, it swallows it. And the human on board, not listed in any manifest, not military, not medical. Then who? Sir Drowl cut in, voice low. Not who, what was he trained to become? Back inside, the Harrow's systems shifted again. Corridor, D7's filtration system activated. No one had turned it on. It hadn't been meant for ventilation anymore. Now it howled like a throat torn open. Because Ekar had retuned it, deliberately, to mimic a warning siren the Threks had used during their own war centuries ago. Now the prey hunted with their voice. The hallway flashed red once, then again, then the lights went out. Only silence, and in it, engineering. They brought specialists. Mark's voice dropped as the heads-up display bathed the dim operations room in red glyphs. Outside the Orion Harrow, 3 dropships detached from the Threk's forward carrier, their hulls jagged like fractured bone, trailing cloaked signal dampeners. The sensor feed didn't blink. It warped, lines distorting as if reality itself were folding inward. On board, Ref stood frozen by the forward array. Combat suits, full-body exo-rigging. They're not searching, Mark added. They're expecting confirmation kills. Ekor was already gone. In Corridor C2, Ekor crouched by the remains of a sterilization node. He opened the control panel and extracted a tri-spooled acoustic emitter. Originally designed to reduce ambient pressure in post-op chambers, it now pulsed with randomized frequency bursts that overloaded sensory calibrations in Threk's helmets. He adjusted the resonance to oscillate in 3.4-second intervals, enough to confuse their movement tracking, but not so long they'd adapt. Behind him, Kor approached with an armful of unused signal clamps. You knew they'd escalate. Ekor replied without turning. I didn't know when, just that they would stop underestimating us the moment they stopped hearing us scream. He plugged the final relay, twisted the control cap, and moved on. The Threk's elite entered Corridor D5 with synchronized precision. Their thermal optics glowed gold, processing ambient heat in multiple spectra. They advanced swiftly, silent, focused, unshaken. The moment their boots touched the grates, the noise began. Not a siren, not even a sound. A frequency, impossible to interpret, built for disruption, not communication. Every suit's HUD flashed error warnings in cycles too fast for real-time decoding. Cross signals surged across comm bands. Encrypted channels began relaying phantom movements, enemies where there were none, allies flagged as threats. Their formation collapsed instantly. One fired at a shadow. Another twisted to avoid nothing. A third fell, armor scraping across the walls as the hallway blurred in flickering pulses of white and green. They'd entered a ship. They were now inside a diagnosis. Ref moved alongside Kor toward the secondary lockdown module. He's not targeting them directly. He's letting their own tech consume itself, Kor replied. They turned into Corridor B9, just as the lights died. No explosion, no alert, simply blackness. Then a glow, the walls came alive with tiny indicators pulsing from deep within the panels, like veins lit beneath skin. Signals rerouted through biological architecture. The ship wasn't reacting, it was evolving. Mark's console flared again. They're reporting internal chaos. Threk's commands trying to terminate drone feeds. They don't want the Council seeing this. Too late. The broadcast, hijacked by a dormant survey satellite above the Harrow, was already streaming to 9 open observer channels across the Galactic relay. On the Council's deck, Sir Drowl stood, eyes fixed on the central feed. The Threk squad was turning on itself. Static sliced the image into jagged shards of confusion, brief flashes of movement, followed by sudden stillness. One trooper swung blindly into his comrade's visor. Another fired twice into a wall, screamed, and detonated his own coolant pack. No enemy had touched them. Council analysts scrambled to interpret the situation. This can't be engineered. There's no weapon signature. It's not a weapon, it's environment. But none of this is classified military gear. That's the point, another said, stunned. Nothing on board this ship violates the Treaty of Biomechanical Engagement. It's all reconfigured. Reconfigured from what? A pause. From tools of care. Ekor stepped through the cargo nexus, rewiring a stack of med dispenser batteries into a timed delay loop. He did not speak. His movements flowed like muscle memory, not fast, efficient, purpose-driven. In the silence, Ref appeared at the edge of the chamber. He didn't interrupt. He just watched. Finally, he asked, "Is this how you survived before?" Ekor adjusted the output calibration. "It's how others didn't." On Deck 6, two surviving Threx specialists reached a bulkhead door and forced it open. On the other side, nothing. Just empty space. No lock warning. No magnetic seal. One stepped through. A half-second later, his armor folded outward, pulled, not ejected. Space took him in silence. No scream. No trail. The other lunged back, hands trembling, weapon raised, but found himself facing the decompression lock he'd just breached. It closed. Behind him. Back in the council observation deck, silence fell over the room. Sir Dral stepped forward. He whispered, "This isn't survival." No one answered. He looked again at the final corridor readout, where motion had stopped completely. Dral's voice, softer this time, "This is correction." He's walking through coolant with his bare hands. The sentence left the technician's mouth like static dropped from a high ledge. On the bridge of the Koran diplomatic frigate Soe, the observation crew clustered around the primary laser plasma dome, transfixed by the orbital feed. They watched the human figure, no suit, no thermal barrier, thread fluid tubing through a ruptured regulator. His skin blistered, then froze in patches, his jaw locked. Still he kept working. General Sir Dral narrowed his eyes. "Send a relay hail. Immediate identification." No answer came from the Harrow. Not even static. Inside the Orion Harrow's lower conduit trench, Ekor twisted the final valve shut. The coolant system screeched once as pressure refocused. Steam evaporated around his forearms in wild spirals, streaking the walls with frost. The contact had seared nerve endings, but he moved on, fingers trembling only slightly. From behind, Mark called out, voice cutting through the low pressure his. "We have signal again. Short burst relay only. Let me open a channel. Someone needs to explain." Ekor turned. "They'll cut the feed before you finish the first word. But if we don't talk, they'll talk for us." Mark hesitated. He tapped the command pad, blinking at the request log. The message never left the buffer, jammed from the outside. He exhaled, muttering to no one. "They're afraid of a conversation." Ref Varden stood alone in Auxiliary Archive 2. The lights buzzed irregularly. Power drains had left most terminals inactive, but he'd forced a bypass through a surgical cart's backup cells. The screen flickered, booted and loaded partial internal records. He scrolled, Varden Ekor status, logistics, clearance, nominal. Deployment history null, birth registry, encrypted. Medical file looped access denial. Then something unusual. A trace echo. One entry had not deleted cleanly. He tapped the corruption node and watched the cycle hang, revealing a partial string of command logs manually rewritten in bridge code, 6 years before the Harrow launched. He whispered, "He built part of this ship." A loading bar stalled at 92%. He didn't need the rest. The mystery wasn't in who Ekor had been. It was what they'd let him become. In Corridor B3 a fresh Threx unit advanced, better armor, full-spectrum lenses, reactive underlays. These weren't pirates. They were clawed precision. The moment they breached the midpoint, Ekor's coolant rig activated. The walls vented. Ice exploded from the panels, not as frost, but as targeted blasts of engineered cryo-fluid compressed to instability. The corridor didn't freeze. It constricted, forcing atmospheric pressure to collapse inward. One soldier's suit split at the knee. Another's optics frosted blind. A third raised his weapon, only for it to shatter in his grip. They didn't scream, but their movements stuttered. The cold didn't stop them. It erased orientation. Above aboard the Soe, a secondary analyst ran the event through 8 simulation models. None predicted this configuration. "This isn't standard coolant routing." Dral replied, "It's not routed. It's redirected." The analyst scrolled the footage back. "He's weaponizing cooling systems with vector control. The frost doesn't spread. It hunts. And our envoy protocol. No entry. No landing. No intervention. Drow turned to his comms officer. Send a neutral code ping. No effect. Send it again. The display remained dark. We've lost the floor, one officer muttered. No, Drow corrected. We never stood on it. Back on the Harrow, Kor approached Ref outside the medbay, his face pale. They're circling, he said. The council ships, watching. Ref looked out the narrow port slit. The lights of the Koran flagship glowed soft gold, harmless, decorative, like ceremonial torches at a ritual they hadn't been invited to. They're waiting for us to explain what they saw, Ref said. Kor tilted his head. What did they see? Ref didn't answer. Mark returned to the lower trench. Ekor sat on a support brace, hand wrapped in cloth, stripped from a trauma sling. The scent of chemical coolants lingered in the air, sharp, but not biting. It stung the eyes, curled under the tongue. Mark crouched beside him. I tried to warn them. Ekor looked at the wall, not the man. They've already written their version. Mark watched him for a moment. Ref found fragments. Your file's been overwritten. Ekor met his gaze for the first time in hours. I'm not hiding. Then who are you? A long pause. Then still learning. Outside, the drifting Threx command ship adjusted orientation, preparing another wave. The council's delegates debated ceasefire notices. Emergency regulations flicked across Galactic network forums. Arguments formed in 5 languages over how to define a civilian vessel, armed with no weapons, deploying no soldiers, running no combat AI, yet leaving only corpses behind. Inside the diplomatic assembly chamber, a motion was tabled, immediate reclassification of all human medical transports under potential dual-use designations. No one objected. The silence wasn't submission, it was calculation. Inside the Harrow, the ice melted slowly into the floor. Ekor stood again, brushing his fingers against the coolant tube once more, checking the tension, not the temperature. It was ready. Council drones inbound. 5 signatures, non-armored, just eyes. Mark's words crackled across the heads-up relay with a dryness that didn't need embellishment. From the command node of the Orion Harrow, Ref stood in silence, watching the outer perimeter feed. The new arrivals weren't soldiers. They carried no weapons, emitted no comms, made no attempts to hail. They were sent to observe and shape. Ref didn't look away. They want control of the narrative. They're too late, Ekar replied. High above the Harrow, the drones descended with absolute neutrality. Their exteriors gleamed with reactive mesh, designed for light refraction, making them appear ghost-like in motion. Each one broadcast on an open feed, siphoning the scene in real time across diplomatic servers, galactic media circuits, and archival vaults. Except something shifted. The lens feeds didn't return. They looped. First 5 seconds, then 20. Then 73 seconds of footage broadcast to the council, not of the Harrow's current state, but of what had happened before. Threx corpses folded by cryogenic burst traps, a trooper's optic imploding under frequency overload, a commando unit slicing through their own squad in panic, blinded by rerouted biothermal signatures. Uncut, unenhanced, undeniable. On the deck of the Koran council ship Soya, Sir Dral turned sharply from the feed as the audio cut in, brief, hollow, surgical. Each moment played with no added commentary, just original sounds, the rasp of claws against floor plating, the cough of someone suffocating under flickering lights, the wet silence that followed the collapse of another raid unit. One drone displayed the phrase before shutting down, non-combatant status, revoked. Across the galaxy, the transmission didn't pause. On Helion's education dome, combat instructors killed their live stream mid-sentence. In the Vrenian War Archive, the footage auto-indexed under tactical anomalies. On a refueling platform in the Dressed Belt, a mechanic rewound the segment of Ekar building a pressurized frost trap from 2 oxygen tanks and a dental clamp, watched it 4 times, then shut his terminal off and walked away. Inside the Harrow, Ref stood beside a flickering medbay panel. The temperature had stabilized. The wounded were breathing. No one had died since the 3rd wave. He looked toward the feed Mark had pulled up on the alternate console, where the council broadcast tried to resume commentary, but every word failed beneath the looping footage. Ref murmured. He didn't save us. Core, still stained from coolant repair, raised an eyebrow. Then what did he do? Ref's voice dropped. He demonstrated us. Ekar stood inside the auxiliary routing junction, one hand resting against the remains of a cryo chamber, now serving as a transmission shield. He stared at the command stack and typed in a line of code not meant for this ship, not meant for any ship. The feed returned to real time. A static frame blinked into clarity. A council officer stared into the transmission, expecting parley, expecting maybe a claim. What they got instead was text burned in simple white font across the lower third. Directive status updated. Civilian classification invalidated. No sound, just stillness. Above, the drones began failing one by one, not from impact or EMPs, permission revocation. They had been granted access only long enough to become messengers. Their final images were of Ekar sitting by a coolant rig, no helmet, skin raw, checking the pressure of a frost line with a stripped power gauge. A human, nothing more, and that was the problem. Council seats across 6 systems debated emergency clauses, fleet formation near medical territories, and temporary embargoes on human-built support vessels. But no one spoke of retaliation. Not anymore. Someone whispered in the room. What if that wasn't the worst he could do? Back on the Harrow, Ref watched Core finish welding shut the last internal access tunnel. It was clean, sealed, silent. You think they'll stop? They'll watch, Core said. And after, Core didn't answer. Mark stepped in, holding a datapad. That footage, it's already on war boards, training decks, news loops. They're calling it the Harrow Doctrine. Ref turned slowly. It wasn't doctrine. No, it was surgery. At last, aboard the Soya, Sir Dral walked to the central interface, cut every open feed with a motion of his hand, and activated an internal-only channel. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand a reply. He only spoke once. Do not approach the Orion Harrow. He paused. I found him. Mark's voice didn't rise, but it pulled every eye in the command station toward the central display. Static peeled away as the final decryption layer broke. Manual override by command line, not software. Ref leaned in, staring at the old Earthside symbol at the top left corner. Blackfielded terrain suppression OPS. The file stuttered once, then ran clean. Varn Ecker, designation redacted. Field tag, AM91. Previous operation, Norseth Protocol. Role, tactical isolation agent. Result, full planetary quarantine. No weapons used. Environmental erasure completed within 47 minutes. 72 enemy operatives removed via artificial tectonic instabilities and atmosphere remixing. Service medal declined. Transfer requested, not filed. No forwarding command. Ref exhaled. He didn't go rogue. He disappeared on purpose. Outside the Orion Harrow, the Council's revised doctrine was issued before midday. All human medical vessels to undergo auxiliary asset review. Unarmed now meant unpredictable. Rescue ship no longer meant passive. Every human-built life support grid was now tagged with dual-use risk. Containment ships, hospital cruisers, ambulatory floats. Diplomats called for clarification. No human official responded. None needed to. Ecker was walking corridor F3 now, hands empty, shoulders loose. No blood on his clothing, only machine grease and dried coolant. At every junction he stopped, adjusted something, oxygen density, shield calibration, valve timing. No alarms, no ceremony, just structure returning to equilibrium. Core followed him 2 paces behind, silent until they reached the pediatric wing. He finally spoke. You're not staying, are you? Ecker didn't pause. You don't need me to. That's not what I asked. This time, Ecker stopped, turned, looked Core in the eyes. No, he said. You're stable now. On the broadcast decks of the Core and Observer fleet, the reaction was muted. They had seen horror. They had studied catastrophe. But this was something different. A man who never raised his voice yet dismantled an invasion using nothing but environment, entropy, and silence. In the war archive of Veltor Prime, an elder tactician leaned back in his seat, fingers trembling as he watched the footage again. Not the explosions, not the aftermath. The sequences, each one layered to cause collapse, not destruction. I've seen strategy, he muttered. This was judgment. Ref stood alone now in the med bay. The lights had returned to full output. Patients were stable. Systems held. There had been no external breaches in 32 minutes. But nothing felt safe. Mark walked in, holding the decrypted pad. He didn't say anything, just handed it over. Ref scanned it again. Every mission report ended the same. Agent departed location. Unaccompanied. No trace. All systems reset. He handed it back. There's a reason he doesn't give speeches. In the central repair bay, Ecker knelt by the pediatric bot. Its dome cracked, painted sun warped, servos dead. He didn't open it, didn't salvage the components, didn't restore the casing. He simply unfolded a square of cloth from his kit, a torn piece of the original triage blanket, and laid it over the robot like a funeral shroud. Mark appeared in the doorway. You could have walked away before it began. Ecker nodded once, but it would have spread. And now, he rose, now it won't. Far beyond, council ships began rotating away from the Harrow's orbit. No final comms, no warnings, just a turn. They left like funeral guests who understood that no words would match what had been done. In the communications chamber aboard the Soya, Sir Drawl signed the emergency amendment with 3 words stamped in relay script: do not engage. Ref and Core stood at the forward viewing deck. The ship felt clean again, operable, still. Think he'll take another ship? Core asked. Ref shook his head. He never takes, he said. He leaves something behind. The lights in corridor B4 flickered once. Normal now. The hum of stabilization coils returned. Cool air cycled through in steady breaths. At the end of the hall, the access door opened, and Varn Ecker stepped through for the final time. Alone, hands bare, he looked like a man checking for temperature, for flow, for nothing to break ever again. Don't touch the helm. He left it exactly as it was. Ref's voice drifted low across the medbay corridor, softer than the rhythmic thrum of filtered air through the sealed compartments. Core froze mid-step. Behind him, Mark lowered a fresh diagnostic readout into its socket and stepped back without speaking. They had returned everything to its rightful place. Every clamp, every scanner, every sterile field grid, but the ship didn't feel restored. It felt archived. The Orion Harrow rotated slowly beneath starlight, its hull clean, unmarked by fire or debris. Outside, what remained of the Threx forces spiraled in frozen motion. The bodies didn't float, they orbited. No blood painted the viewports, only consequences. No council ship approached, not one hailed. The Corps and fleet maintained distance, trailing passive scans with broadcast silence. Even the drone relay feeds, once overloaded with frantic interpretation, went dim. Observers debated privately now, behind closed encryption, across the galactic stream. The story fractured into theories. Some insisted it was AI-run sabotage. Others whispered it was a prototype ship with embedded defense logic never disclosed. The term organic system override trended for 12 hours before being deleted by every allied server node. But one word remained pinned to every message board, every command screen, every political docket: Harrow. No title, no explanation, just a name that no one dared to follow. In the medbay, Ref methodically sealed the last surgical tray. Every rack wiped, every station reset. No damage remained. Too perfect. He stared at the gleaming floor, hands steady, but chest heavy. It's like he erased what happened without deleting it. Core sat nearby, watching the deck indicators blink blue. You ever seen anything built to survive an event like this? Not survive, Ref muttered. Conclude. At the main helm, Varn Ecker stood alone. One hand hovered over the nav sequence, the other adjusting environmental balance by touch. He didn't speak. The heads-up display reflected across his cheekbone as course vectors flickered into alignment. Destination: Sector Null 4, uninhabited, deep drift zone, not Earth, not a station, just away. Mark's voice came through the overhead. Vector plotted. No traffic on approach. Radiation field stable. Long-range sensors show nothing in pursuit. Ecker tapped a single control pad. Auto-seal on atmospheric thresholds, he said, not looking back. Recalibrate filtration to 83% humidity for long-duration containment. Cycle all surgical logs into black buffer. Core stepped into the helm's edge, one hand resting on the doorway. You're not going home. Ecker's answer came without hesitation. No home left for this. Across Corin space, encrypted feeds burned hot. Human command gave no statements, no orders were issued, no medals awarded. Earth's official channels remained blank. The silence wasn't oversight. It was strategy. In a council archive chamber, buried beneath Junt's diplomatic ring, one analyst whispered beneath his breath as the footage played again. He killed no one directly. Another nodded. But none of them lived. What does that make him? The first analyst paused. An answer. Back in the medbay, Ref opened one of the cleaned lockers. Inside, folded perfectly, lay a field uniform no one remembered issuing. The tag inside read, AM-91. No department, no division. He didn't touch it. Behind him, the pediatric wing's lights dimmed one notch. Ekor had passed through. Kor leaned against the corridor wall. You think he knew how this would end? Mark shook his head. I think he understood how it could. That was enough. Inside the pediatric wing, Ekor reached the last bot. Its dome still cracked. The cartoon sun flaked beyond recognition. He didn't attempt repair. He placed a folded cloth over its frame, same one he'd used before. No ceremony, no speech, just a cover. Job's done, he whispered. No one was there to hear it. The Orion Harrow shifted. Thrusters engaged. Lights stabilized. Gravity seals equalized along all decks. From the helm, a single message went out across open bands. No encryption, no signature. Proceeding to orbital field station. No further incidents. Orion Harrow signing off. In the Galactic Council chamber, the message reached its final receiver. Sir Drawl listened to it in silence. He leaned forward, hands folded, face unreadable. Do we log it? An aide asked quietly. Drawl replied, no. What should we file under? His answer came flat. Closed. The ship moved. No ceremony, no light show, no fanfare, just propulsion vectors shifting to distant black. One ship, one man, 48 confirmed dead, no questions answered, and silence that spread further than any war cry ever could.